Matthews and Mueller. Well, these aren't really secrets because I know about them, but it's not the kind of information that you typically find in art history books.
This may come as a surprise to you, but Leonardo da Vinci's last name was not da Vinci. Da Vinci means from Vinci, the small town near Florence where Leonardo was born in 1452. His name was actually Leonardo da Ser Piero, Leonardo, the son of Signore Piero. As you already know from school, most Europeans living during that time period did not have what we know as last names. That is, family names that are passed down from generation to generation. Like Leonardo, they had first names, typically followed by the name of their father, sometimes combined with that of their mother, grandfather, or occupation. For example, brewer, carpenter, baker. Customs varied because people did not need legal identifications like we do today. Passport? What are you talking about? By the 17th century, however, names began to be standardized into family names or last names. Lisa, daughter of Lars, son of Olaf the Merchant, became names such as Larsdottir, Olafsson, and Merchant. And the descendants of John, son of Richard the Archer from London, might use last names such as Johnson, Richardson, Archer, London, and so on. But that change had not yet taken place during the 15th century. So in the small village of Vinci, Leonardo could be known as simply son of Piero the accountant. But in Florence, a much larger city, an additional identifier needed to be added. You know, Leonardo, the artist from Vinci. But a word of caution here. If you go back in time, don't address him as Da Vinci, as in, glad to meet you, Mr. Da Vinci. That would be met with confusion and probably a good deal of scorn. He was known as Maestro Leonardo as a matter of respect, or as Leonardo da Vinci, but never as Da Vinci. That wouldn't have made sense, although his friends might have nicknamed him Vinci. Incidentally, men who dress flamboyantly in feathered hats and brightly colored doublets and hose, like this gentleman, were called Macaroni, as in the song Yankee Doodle. Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap and called it Macaroni. The name of the pasta macaroni derives from the ancient Greek Macaria, a barley broth served to commemorate the dead. The relationship between the barley broth, pasta, and flamboyant men's clothing is unclear, but it was certainly not meant to be flattering, and I don't think it's the barley suit that's being referenced. In any event, these particular macaroni were painted by the Renaissance artist Michelangelo Maurici da Caravaggio, who was, and is, generally known simply as Caravaggio, the name of his hometown. Other artists who were known by the name of their hometowns include Andrea Pisano, Pisa, Pietro da Cortona, Cortona, Paolo Veronese, Verona, Domenico Veneziano, Venice, and Rembrandt van Rijn. Van means from in Dutch. And while we are on the subject, the last name of painter Vincent van Gogh includes the van preposition, meaning from Gogh. Originally, this name indicated that a person was from the town of Gogh on the border of the Netherlands in the Cleve district of Germany. Van Gogh was not from Gogh, although this is the correct pronunciation of his name, more or less. In 1853, when Vincent van Gogh was born, the old system of giving everyone individualized names was long gone. At one time, however, someone in Van Gogh's family tree had been from Gogh. But moving on to nicknames. Giving people nicknames was a very common practice during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Many of these were complimentary, such as Richard the Lionhearted and Philip the Bold. But others were very mean-spirited and today would be considered bullying. For example, Ethelred the Unready, Charles the Bald, and Dick Crookback, a nickname given to King Richard III of England, mocking the fact that he had curvature of the spine. Artists were also given nicknames, especially in Italy. Some were harmless enough. For example, Sandro di Mariano de Vanni Filippelli was always called Botticelli, which means little wine cask. Why he was called this is unclear, but one legend has it that his older brother started calling him that when he was a child, perhaps because he was a bit pudgy. As an adult, Botticelli used it himself, apparently taking no offense. But other nicknames, although probably considered humorous at the time, were actually quite cruel. The Florentine artist Tommaso di Ser Giovanni da Simone was always called Masaccio, a name that means clumsy, dirty, or messy. Giovanni Francesco Barbari was known as Guercino, which means squint eye, a reference to the fact that he had lazy eye or strabismus. Unkind to be sure, but it was so universally used that it's even on his tombstone. But the name Fra, brother, Filippo Lippi is not a nickname. He really was an ordained priest of the Carmelite order, although he was certainly not celibate. In this painting, he used his son as the model for the baby Jesus, and his baby's mother, the Dominican nun Lucrezia Butti, for the Madonna. The baby looks just like him. However, before you judge, remember that this was the 15th century, and things were different from today. There's a larger story here. People unable to care for an infant could anonymously surrender him or her at a convent, monastery, or orphanage using an ingenious device known as a baby hatch or baby wheel. The baby would be placed into the box and the wheel turned, putting the baby safely inside where they would be cared for. This practice fell out of favor in the 19th century, but has now been revived by municipal authorities worldwide as a way of saving infants from being abandoned. Orphaned as a baby, Filippo Lippi was put under the care of an aunt who was too poor to raise him. When he was 8 years old, she surrendered him to the Carmelite order at the Church of Santa Maria del Carmine in Florence. This is the location of the Brancacci Chapel where Masaccio's famous frescoes are located. Young Filippo got to watch as Masaccio painted them, and it inspired him to become an artist himself. The Carmelite order didn't stand in his way. On the contrary, they paid for his art training. But there was a catch. Surrendered babies and children were required to take holy orders when they grew up, meaning they were expected to join the religious order that had provided them their care and education. But not everyone was suited to this vocation, and issues arose. So the fact that Filippo Lippi had love affairs, got involved in lawsuits, and eventually moved out of the monastery is not surprising. However, he was never released from his vows. He was Fra Filippo Lippi for life. Not a problem, because he had earned the patronage of Florence's most powerful and influential citizen, Cosimo de' Medici himself. In 1469, through the intervention of Cosimo, Fra Lippi received dispensation from the Pope to marry the now former nun Lucrezia Butti. But he died before the dispensation arrived. Rumor had it that he was poisoned by one of Lucrezia's relatives, but accounts vary. In any event, their son Filippino, trained in Botticelli's studio, also became a famous artist. Botticelli had been a student of Fra Filippo Lippi, so we can follow the development of the characteristic 15th century Florentine painting style from Masaccio to Filippo Lippi to Botticelli to Filippino Lippi and finally to Michelangelo. And as for Michelangelo, he had a real last name, Buonarroti, because he was descended from a noble family, and noble families passed down their names through the generations as part of their inheritance. While we're on the subject of Botticelli and Michelangelo, let's look at nudity in Western art. Sculpting nudes goes back to the Stone Age, when they were created as fertility objects, we think. However, in modern times, the concept originated with the ancient Greeks. Although the Greeks themselves wore clothes in everyday life, they did not have the same ideas about nudity as we do today, at least not about male nudity. Male nudes became a favorite subject for art. Women had to be clothed. Sculptors got around this by dressing them in thin, clingy fabric that became known in modern times as wet drapery, or taking off their clothes as they were stepping into a bath. The Romans were more prudish, and even refused to take part in the Greek Olympics because athletes had to compete in the nude. Nevertheless, they loved Greek sculpture and hired artists to make copies of famous works, nude or not. But with the advent of Christianity, depictions of nudes ceased, except for Adam and Eve, who didn't wear clothes because that's the point of the story. This gradually changed during the Renaissance, when all things related to classical antiquity became the height of fashion, at least among rich people such as the Medici. So Western art began to feature lots of nudity. It became known as heroic nudity, because at first the only beings portrayed that way were gods, goddesses, and heroes from ancient Greece and Rome, and sometimes from the Bible. But nudity was always widely condemned by church authorities. both Catholic and Protestant. Fig leaves were applied to statues. Foliage and drapery were added to paintings, even to the nudes painted in the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo, and this happened only a few years after Michelangelo's death. But when celebrities began having themselves portrayed in the nude, well, that was just too much. Here's Napoleon depicted in heroic nudity. Not a good look for a world leader. In 1840, the end for heroic nudity was definitely in sight when sculptor Horatio Greenough portrayed George Washington as the god Zeus, not totally nude, but bare-chested. The work shocked Americans and caused such an uproar that it was removed from the Capitol Rotunda as indecent and disrespectful. It's now in the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. Nudes continued to be painted and sculpted, of course, and continued to cause controversy and outrage. But by the mid-20th century, nudity, heroic or otherwise, ran out of steam. It had lost its audience. Characters from the classical past, nude or clothed, just no longer seemed relevant to the modern age.
For the 10-Minute Professor, this is Dr. Susan Ray Euler. Thanks for tuning in.